Today we're talking about the indie game Ballionaire. It's a roguelike, but very different to something compared like Hades or Slay the Spire. In Ballionaire, you have to drop a ball on a Pachinko board and set off all kinds of triggers, which sounds simple, but it can get quite tricky and pretty chaotic. Sometimes you just don't know what's happening on the screen, but the amazing thing is that you still enjoy it and want to keep playing. The idea for this game comes from the indie dev Brian, aka newobject, who used to work for the iconic game developer Monolith Productions on games like No One Lives Forever and Alien vs Predator 2. So he's got a bunch of stories to tell, and he chatted about it with my husband Eve, and also told us how he got to this point in time.
How do you feel about your upcoming game?
Well, I've been trying to make, my own game like my entire adult life, basically. So it's the culmination of like a really long-standing, dream. And we were just coming out of Next Fest, and the reception was super positive. And so getting to see tens of thousands of people playing your demo, I would say that the dream came true. So I'm feeling great right now. A little tired, a lot of work, but feeling great.
Really a fun game that you're cooking, and can't wait to play more. Can you describe a typical run of Ballionaire? What do players see? What do they hear? And what actions do they have to take?
In Ballionaire, your goal is to satisfy an increasing financial tributes you're paying to these elders. So it, largely inspired by and Landlord, so it follows a similar kind of score attack pattern there of an increasing amount of money you need to make over a number of rounds. So that's the larger structure. Within a round, you typically drop a ball or multiple balls, maybe we'll see, and the ball will fall down something like a Pachinko board. I could talk about that really quick, but it falls down a board, hits a number of symbols, what we call triggers. The triggers have interesting effects that can score money or do other things, including spawning other balls. So the ball drops on the board, maybe some more balls are created, money's earned, eventually all the balls leave the screen, and that's the end of your drop. You've got some more money. You'll do this a number of times, 5 to 7 times typically. And then you have to make sure the tribute's met. After each drop, you get kind of the classic roguelike, draft one of 3 things to add to your board. So it's a board builder. It's not a deck builder, it's a board builder. The board is static, and what's different is the way the balls drop effectively. So after you pay a tribute, you also get a draft of what we call a boon, which is similar to say like a relic in Slay the Spire, or like an item from and Landlord, a passive that modifies the rules of the game. And repeat that 9 times or so. And that's a run of Ballionaire, typically about maybe 30 minutes or so for a run, I think. So it's meant to be, a quick playing, a roguelike game that's all about building synergies in your board and just watching the chaos unfold and trying to reason about why things are happening. Or not, just play on vibes.
That's also the feeling that I got. So every time I went into the higher levels, something happened on screen, and if it started blinking and popping and having these nice sound effects, it was like, okay, I have no idea why it's happening, but I love it. You already mentioned Pachinko as one source of inspiration for your game. Can you describe a little bit how you came up with the idea for the game?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say really quick on this note, technically, the influence is this game Pachinko, which was on an American game show called The Price is Right, where you drop a ball in a trapezoid. I think it's a trapezoid. No, maybe it's a rectangle. The point is, it's kind of a single ball and it falls down and it hits pins on the way down. But it turns out that name is trademarked or copyrighted, so we have to say Pachinko. And plus, I'm not sure that everyone knows what Pachinko is anyway. But right, so the inspirations for my game. Well, I should say that like any good indie game, this game was the result of me taking a break from working on a larger game. I belong to a Discord for Eggplant Podcast, which is a podcast that was originally kind of created around Spelunky and roguelikes in general, although it's broadened its horizons since then. There was a semi-monthly game jam that the podcast would host, and so this game was, made in response to that game jam. I wanted to make a game that I felt could be, done or playable in a few days, so it was something very small scoped. And I'm a huge player of roguelikes in general, and Luck Be a Landlord specifically is just a massive inspiration and sunk a lot of time into that game. So, I figured, okay, well, that's perfect scope for a game. What can I make in a few days? Maybe you see, when we're setting up the interview here, you saw my camera and you saw the wall of board games behind me. I tend to like really enjoy these kind of like discrete strategic games that are largely kind of sit there statically and you have to think and do a turn and that's the game versus, twitchy sorts of games. And so I decided to kind of challenge myself in this case of like, I never have motion in my game, so I should force myself to have motion in this game just to see what would happen. The specific path from there to the first conception of this is a little cloudy to me now, but somehow I hit on the idea of pinball roguelike. Oh, wouldn't that be cool if you could build your own, pinball board in a roguelike way and do things? And as I sat there and just kind of thought about it initially, I was like, well, you could put all these, you could build these really degenerate things very quickly where they trap the ball and yada yada. And I was like, so yeah, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. What if we could set up the rules so that you can't put the objects too close to each other? So anyway, once I'd kind of constrained, what it would take to make pinball work in this fashion, I kind of had the realization that like, oh, well, that's just like Pachinko. If you're not going to like aim and you're going to and you have to put the, things so far apart, it's like Plinko or Pachinko. So basically that was the genesis of the idea. So I would say, Luck Be Landlord plus a forced constraint of like a small scope game and one that involves motion is really the genesis of it. I do think that like subconsciously Totally Accurate Battle Simulator was a huge inspiration under the hood of just like, it's so much fun to just watch chaos unfold. But I will say that's a bit of a after the fact connection. The direct inspiration was these constraints I put on myself plus Luck Be Landlord. So I did kind of achieve that goal of having something working in a few days. And I could feel that very quickly of like, oh, this is really fun to watch. I feel there's stakes like immediately. I feel compelled by, watching the ball go down immediately. So that was a good feeling.
In preparation for the interview, I also did a little digging and found some footage of the prototype that you uploaded to itch. It was really nice to see how those features developed over time.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a very kind of iterative march of mostly adding, occasionally subtracting. There are elements from that October prototype that are effectively still in the game, in some cases almost verbatim. So it's been like a nice Katamari ball of like just ideas can kind of glom onto it and there's a place for them. Some refinement, but a lot of like just kind of like, continual addition.
Speaking about additions and subtractions, what is your favorite feature in the game?
Wow, that's actually a great question. I mean, I think that this isn't something that's a feature per se. I mean, in terms of like directly being implemented as a mechanic, but when you design a game that's what I like to call like a kitchen sink roguelike, where there's so many things in it, it's not possible for you to say, I know all the synergies, I know all the tricks. And so, the favorite feature to me is when you stumble into something effectively. I'll say that like, yeah, we'll spoil a little strat, I guess. There's a trigger in the game called the broom, which is when the ball hits the broom, it goes on a broom ride, which moves it flies horizontally to the opposite side of the screen. So kind of like take the further path. That's fine. You can sometimes hit like a nice row of triggers on the way. But I think in general, when people first encounter that, they don't like it because it's sort of like, well, it just sends the ball off the side of the screen. That's the point. That's true. There's a boon called stop sign, which says when a ball's riding a vehicle and hits the edge of the screen, it dismounts the vehicle and is like thrown back towards the center of the screen. So something I discovered just late one night myself was like, oh, like I can go on a broom ride, throw myself back towards the center of the board, go on another broom ride. Every time I go on the broom ride, I should mention, by the way, I got a 2x multiplier and they stack. So you can kind of create this machine where you just like hop on and off a broom over and over again and end up with like a really shockingly high multiplier. And I think like you have to play the game for a while to discover that. You've got to be a real degenerate to stumble into that. But when you do, you feel so smart. And I love seeing some streamers run into that. They're like, wait a sec, what's going, oh my God. And they create this perpetual broom motion machine, because that's, maybe we'll talk about this a bit, but the game kind of straddles the line between roguelike and sandbox. It's just a toy to some extent. There's a game around it. So when you find like crazy stuff that wasn't even intentionally planned, that to me is like the bread and butter of the game. I definitely have some favorite items or this or that, but like the thing that's really my favorite is that larger meta aspect of you quickly lose control of like your thorough understanding of the game as the designer and developer. There are things combinations you never thought about that your players will discover and will amaze you. So
that's also part of the fun, I would say. So basically, when you play the game and you discover something overpowered, it's like it tickles this part of the brain that is like for discovery. Oh, I discovered something that nobody knows about and can use it to get overpowered.
I love that you use the word tickle there. Specifically, I have this design ethos I've been assembling, I think. Started theoretically before this game. I was able to kind of put some of it into practice, and I'm calling the whole thing brain tickles, actually.
Nice.
And the things you mentioned absolutely are part of that. I think it's something I want to explore more, and hopefully, could talk about sometime, formalizing some of these like feelings we have in games that we maybe don't have a consistent way of talking about.
When Ballionaire drops, no pun intended, you will have quite a good thing to test your theories also in practice and to see what works, what didn't work. You released a Steam Next Fest demo, which was quite successful. Also, you showcased the game on itch.io.
Yeah.
What would you say did you learn from these showcases?
I think I had been working on the game for maybe about 2 weeks before I showed it to anyone, and it quickly gained some traction. I was lucky enough, very fortunately, I presented the game in a Discord that Local Thunk, the developer of Ballionaire, happened to be in. And I guess he took a look at it and, shared it to some streamers like Malf and so on. And so I was really lucky that the prototype got some very quick traction. Hadn't even been out for a month and streamers were playing it. That validation was just that, quick proof that like the core idea was solid. People see the drama of the ball dropping, it's compelling, and then getting to the crazy machine at the end is really satisfying and rewarding. But obviously at the time there wasn't like a ton of depth to it. So, but the strong validation of the core idea, I would say, and frankly, kind of the good injection of confidence that I needed to really pursue it. When you've been trying to like get something going for so long, like I have, it's easy to just second guess everything, and to see people engage with it so compellingly and just kind of universally, positive reaction to it, I'd say, let me know that, okay, this feels like this might have legs. I should really commit myself to this. And I did that for the Steam demo, which comes, quite close to the end of development. It was a great way of distinguishing. Well, first of all, I should say that, like, again, very strong reception. So, okay, I managed to not break anything that was special about the game, while I was working on it. And I would say that, like, we could talk about this, that I did go through periods where I'd say the game lost what made it special and then kind of regained it again. But aside from that, I think that a big thing that I, kind of got from Steam Next Fest was a reminder that every player individually goes on the journey of mastery, starting from like, I don't even understand what the game's talking about, what's a holder, that sort of thing, to you do your first, big brained trigger placement. You're like, oh, if I put the jump rope under the bomb goblin, like he gets hit over and over, I'm really smart. There's so many things that to me, obviously I've lost all perspective on it. They're just so trivial at this point. But you forget that like every player goes on that journey of like, I know nothing, I know a little bit, I'm pretty good, and to like, I'm a genius with the game. I think that I made the mistake of looking at kind of like thinking about and designing for the aggregate player who's like an expert at that point, right? But you forget that like everyone, when they first encounter the game, they'll go through that, and that can be really rewarding for them and really fun. There's really two different life cycles to the game. There's that new player experience, and then there's the steady state of mastery. And the game, really it benefits to service both of those experiences. And some people may never even make it out of the new player experience. So a lot of things that I felt were just kind of old hat, and like, I'm sick of that and it's not interesting. It's like, no, that's completely that's my broken perspective of like working on the game, so intently for a year straight. And that like, these are really fun things for players to encounter and master. There were just a number of like design problems, I think, that I was constantly fighting with that really are like in theory problems. And it turns out, when you have something that's a little degenerate or overpowered, like people just love that. They feel so smart when they find it out. It's so satisfying, to see the thing in motion. When you, as a designer, you can think that like, well, these things are warts and they need to be stamped out. The game has to be like completely smoothed over. So like, nothing's too powerful. But I think when you do that, the game can like lose some of its magic. Like these are effectively broken build games, so you have to you want to have broken builds, you want to have crazy things happen. So I think there was a lot of like discerning. It made very clear what was a problem in my head in theory versus in practice, and just reminding myself that like can't just design the game for like a master player. There's such a journey that player goes on as they learn the game, that like having all those rewarding steps for them along the way is very powerful, even if they seem simple to you from a design point of view at the end, after working on it for a while.
Everyone plays the game differently, and I think that's also, at least from my point of view, makes it fun, because even if you discover a broken build, it's my broken build. So I found it, I discovered it, and you try to perfect it, and you also embrace this in the game. If something is really smooth or doesn't have its edges and isn't that perfect, typically the non-perfect parts are the ones that stick out.
It's tricky because, I think the state of the industry is that like people have definitely gotten very good at sanding down their game in the good sense of like making the flow nice for players and so on and so forth. As it's gotten kind of easier and easier to make games, people can refine these sorts of things, and as collective knowledge grows, like we know what players like and don't like and what's convenient and inconvenient. But I think it can be taken too far of just having something that's like utterly smooth is missing the opportunity for the highs and lows you can get with something that can be a little spikier.
It's a fine line to ride. So of course you want to have it as good as possible, but especially when you look at AAA games today, there are a few that stick out because typically you try to play it safe. Of course, there's a lot of money involved, team sizes. If you have a good idea, you have to discuss it not only with yourself, but with other developers, game planners, and whoever is involved. This is why it's nice that since you're developing the game, you get this freedom to really decide, okay, that could be fun, or even if it's broken, I'll leave it in, and you don't have to go through a whole trial.
Absolutely. Coming from a corporate background where we would have a meeting to prepare for the meeting, suffice it to say, it's so freeing to kind of operate this way. And I love being in the petri dish of indie. I mean, I think that like, obviously this is where real innovation happens, right? And maybe there's refinement at the AAA level, obviously, but we can iterate so quickly with the smaller scope, right? We're just going to find things faster with the way that, indies are, and when I say indie, I kind of mean small devs here, not publisher situation or whatever. When small devs can operate, smaller time scale, faster iteration, we're just going to find fun, find new modes of fun faster than AAA ever could. And then, maybe that's just the way things are supposed to be, right?
I agree. Before we get to your journey as a game developer, what are your long-term plans for Ballionaire?
Sure. So I think something I've found is that when most people play the game, so I guess for just more context, almost everything in Ballionaire, the concepts are sort of everyday items. There's a brick, there's a mushroom. The setting of the world is kind of non-specific, and I really tried to make the items in the game just be kind of everyday items that people understand like what they are at an intuitive level, and the mechanics try to reflect like what the item is. So I found that it's like very natural for people to play the game and just have their own ideas immediately about like, oh, what if there was a trigger that blah, blah, blah. So we do plan on launching the game with strong mod support for custom content. So that's actually going to be in V1, but I really hope that the community picks that up, and would love to obviously support that mod capability just to enable all the creativity that I'm sure is out there laying in wait. I love, just for my professional background, and I've always loved making things that let other people make things. And so I see kind of like supporting mods strongly in Ballionaire as enabling creativity in fans of the game, which I'm very hopeful for. I'll also say that, because of like how kind of easy it is for ideas to pop up when you play with this game, either individual ideas or systemic ideas, there is a long list of I'd like to do that someday. So there's definitely just a backlog sitting there on just the standard gameplay elements of like new systems, new mechanics, new trigger ideas, that sort of thing. As well as I'd also say that I think I can say that in V1 will have unlocks, but there won't be a meta game per se, in the sense of like increasing the power level of some other meta structure that you're playing. The game will just have kind of unlocks, like maybe Balatro or whatever. I do think I've kind of like cracked in my head the nut of like, well, what does a meta game for Ballionaire look like? And that's something that if things go well, I'd love to explore after launch. Pretty excited about the idea that's in my head, at least. I think that's, I think that's, maybe that's all I can say right now, is that like, there's obviously a lot more, there's a long linear path of systems and content. Really want to strongly support the modding community if they happen to show up. And I do think there's some meta structure that I'd love to explore to the game.
Perfect. You got me sold with mod support. That's always a great thing to have, because the community typically shines the most when you give them the tools to do so. Or they don't have to hack your game to do something, but the developer supports it right away. That's always a great thing to have.
Absolutely, yeah.
newobject, when I got in touch with you, I asked you to fill out a small questionnaire, as we do with all our guests here on the show. And when you did so, you also wrote me that you've been developing games since you were 8 or 9 years old, which is really cool. And you describe a little bit how you got started as a game dev.
Sure, I'll try to keep it concise because I've had a long journey. I'll just say that I am one of those people that was just kind of born knowing what they wanted to do. And I don't even know how or why. So my mom, I guess we should just get out of the way that I'm old. I think I could say that objectively. I'm 49 years old. I was born in the mid-70s.
Yeah, don't worry about it. I was born 1985. And I learned one day that after 30, we're all the same age. So.
I love that for me. Just a funny anecdote is like my mom, I don't know, it's a kind of common thing in the US at least, or your parents kind of keep like a little log, when you're a kid, of like, my favorite food is blah, and like I want to be blah when I grow up. And apparently when I was 7, I said I wanted to be a computerist when I grew up.
Nice.
That was 1982. I'm fairly certain I'd never even seen a personal computer. So I don't know where that came from. We had some home entertainment systems. We even had something that's like before the Atari 2600, if you can believe that. I don't know. I was just born this way, been compelled. I used to make like little games out of like tinfoil and cardboard when I was a kid because, what else were you going to do? I've got an Apple II, I think when I was like 9 years old or so. My dad, God bless him, sat down with me with the AppleSoft Basic book. And he's not a programmer. He is like an entrepreneur basically, and worked with me to learn Basic. And about a weekend, he couldn't follow along anymore, but I was just devouring it. So that's just where that got started. My first game was a game called Escape School, which was kind of just like a maze game. You have to get out of the school. But that was, kind of as you're growing up, it ebbs and flows. But went on through college and left college and went and got a standard corporate job. But at the corporate, so this was 1997 or so, I was working at Microsoft, and Ultima Online had come out, and I was absolutely obsessed with the game. I started working on an Ultima Online server emulator in my spare time. And after about 9 months of that, I was like, well, this is crazy. I have 2 jobs. Like, I should just go get a job at a game company. So I quit Microsoft very suddenly. And so I went to Monolith Productions, which is here in the Seattle area. They're the company that made Blood, No One Lives Forever, Aliens vs. Predator, Fear, Shadows over Mordor, things like that. So yeah, I worked on a number of games there for, maybe 5 years or so. I forget, honestly. And it was a lot of fun. It was a very formative time, really have a lot of freedom there. But at the time, the game industry was just really, really brutal place to be in terms of pay and hours and that kind of stuff. And I kind of knew, well, I'm going to have a family someday, and this seems sort of incompatible with having a family. So I kind of went back to the corporate world and stayed there for about 20 years or so. That whole time, I definitely kept paid very close attention to the indie community, hung out on TIG Source, all the usual places, I guess Flipcode, Dexterity Software, if anyone remembers that, kind of weird casual game forum, and did game jams here and there, and always had a project going on the side. But the reality is, when you're a family man and you're working very intensely at your corporate job, to try as I may, I could never muster the energy to like really get something pushed over the hill. And bear in mind, this is, still in the mid 2000s when I, got out of the industry is like you weren't grabbing Unity off the shelf. I mean, I was making my own engine. Some of those things were available, but for the most part, there was a lot of infrastructure to build to start making a game. It's not like it is now. So the progress was a lot slower. So that whole time, had fun little projects here and there, but could never get anything serious going. Both the lack of an idea, scope that was way too large in reality, and just the inability, just the sort of lack of time really with everything else that was going on in my life. So in that industry for 20 years, I reached a point where, I ran the numbers and I was like, okay, I could probably, move to an industry that I'm a little more motivated intrinsically to work in again, and was preparing to do that. And that's when the big wave of tech layoffs happened. So I found myself in that wave of people, and I was like, well, now's the time. So that was early 2023. So I took a month or two to just recover from working for like 20 years straight, basically. And then immediately fired up VS Code, and Godot. Started, getting back to the dream, working on a larger game, and, decided to take a break from that to work on a smaller game. And that was October 1st, plus or minus a day, 2023. So that's, Ballionaire started October 2023. And like I had already said, I've got traction very quickly, and I've been working on it full time since then to now, the end of October 2024. So
after 20 years of corporate, I think you earned a month off. I worked 11 years corporate, and I gave myself also a few months after I quit.
Yes, you can watch the color return to your skin and the soul return to your eyes.
Yeah, exactly. Describing it quite well. What moment in your life as a developer will you always remember? Is the one that sticks out? I can imagine there were quite a few.
Yeah. I will say, obviously Ballionaire gaining traction was the most rewarding thing by far, and watching streamers play it, and just watching my wife says she loves to watch me watch other people play the game.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, the things that I kind of put into the game with the humor and the drama, it comes across, and people, you see the reactions to it, and it's so rewarding when, someone laughs at something that you hoped someone would laugh at, when a crazy thing happens. So that's obviously far and away the biggest thing. But I will say there were some other moments too, going way back to Monolith. I think we were kind of like an underdog of a company at the time, and in the late 90s, seen as trying to compete with Unreal and id and Quake and all that. I don't think we had a lot of respect at the time. People loved to make fun of us. Old Man Murray, just an old gaming news website. I think the people that ran that are at Valve now, if I'm not mistaken, as writers or something. But they always loved to rag on us. And we were working on No One Lives Forever, just a fantastic team. It was one of those environments where it really felt like a family, like just everyone was in lockstep with each other. Really such a formative and positive time in my life of like working with creative people, and everyone just kind of like delighting each other. You'd add a feature, and the level designer would come back the next day with something you hadn't expected, and then you can play off that. And just a great collaboration. And I think that was really reflected in the game. It was received critically very strongly. People really loved it. I don't know on the finances of it, but critically it was received very strongly. And so Old Man Murray put out a blog post. It was basically like, okay, we have to admit Monolith made a good game, congratulations. And so that was so redemptive to me. Like, we did it. We shattered people's expectations. And so that was just like a nice underdog victory. I'm still friends with everyone from No One Lives Forever. And it's hard not to talk about it when we get together, honestly, like 20 years later. And the other thing I'll say is maybe too is, so the first game I worked on at Monolith, it was this game called Grunts, which was like a cross between Warcraft and Lemmings, like a little puzzle RTS, very strange. So it's the first game I ever worked on, professionally, and I worked on the networking and some other things in there. And I don't think the game had I didn't think the game had a lot of reach. And so it's just funny, decades later to go on YouTube and you look up Grunts videos and people saying like, oh, this is like my childhood. And back in the day, you sell a game, put it in a box, goes on a shelf. You might see a review in a print magazine, but it wasn't like you had any sense of like people's reactions to it, honestly. And so getting to find out like decades later that like the game was really formative for some people was like really rewarding after it felt like we just kind of pushed it out into the void. It's like, well, I guess it's old or something, or maybe it didn't. I don't know. But next game, so.
If someone said, yeah, that was my childhood game, and so I can imagine that's a really great moment to have.
It is. It's, and it's really safe too, because no one's going to go on the Grunts YouTube video and say, I hated this game, I returned it. It's like, it's only, when it's retrospective, it's always positive comments only. You can look at the comment section on these videos, it turns out.
But that's the nice thing about nostalgia. So it paints everything in a little softer light.
That's true.
In your opinion, what is the best part about developing your own game?
It is somewhat singularly your vision going out there. I would say that like just on a personal level, I'm a person that's came to find out late in life that they were an intuitive person. It's easy for a person who's got a math degree and works in computers to think, oh, I must be an analytical person. But I really never was. I was an intuitive person, and I didn't understand that or respect it about myself. And so when you're making a game where you're effectively, calling the shots on everything that goes in there, you're really putting yourself on the line. And obviously you can take a very analytical approach if you're thus inclined in terms of all the user testing and getting data. That's not really how I work. I mean, I do work largely on vibes and my personal feelings. And so when you wrap that up and put it in a box and share it with the world, it's hard for it to not be a judgment of you effectively. And so I love that, Ballionaire, I think, really represents a fairly uncompromised, or maybe an entirely uncompromised vision of what I wanted it to be. I was lucky enough that, the artists that I did work with, really understood like how I wanted the game to look and executed that perfectly. So there was no compromise there. And in terms of what the game is about, how it plays, how it respects the user, respects the player, it's a fairly uncompromised vision. Now, having said that, if the game had got out, people have been like, what are these cartoon graphics? This is a kid's game, or, who cares about dropping a ball, or what's this, the stuff for the elders? There's no story, yada, yada, it would have been, I would have really taken that as quite a rejection, I suppose, because it's really, there's a lot of me wrapped up in the game, honestly. I mean, know me to know that. It's not overt at all, but it is a lot of myself like poured into that game in terms of its aesthetics and message and that sort of thing. So I love that, I could do something that was like really a very faithful rendering of like what I wanted it to be. But at the same time, and I didn't really understand this until it came closer to people encountering the game, as like, oh gosh, like I'm actually like really tied up in the outcome here on an emotional level. Like, wow, I hadn't thought about that. And I kind of like for the first time experienced that like creative fear that I think a lot of creative people, describe, like, what are people going to think? Like I never had that problem because no one was ever looking at anything I was working on. Turns out, well, now something's on the line. It's like, oh, okay. So I've been coping with that. But I mean, obviously, again, when you work in a corporate environment for that long, everything is about compromise, or if not compromise, influence campaigns, right? Get people to see it your way. And this is an environment where I could be like, this is how I want it to be. This is how it's going to be, budget and what notwithstanding, not an issue for a game of this scope. And so I think it was received well. And so I think that's kind of a validation of like what I wanted people, what I wanted to present to people. So I love that. So it's a lot of freedom, but a lot of like risk, I guess, in terms of the rejection that could await you.
When you look at the game, when you listen to the game, it creates such a beautiful atmosphere. The theme song is stuck in my head together with this dancing stick figure in the beginning. Totally love it.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. And I should call out the musician as well. I mean, this was music that is free to use. Stevia Sphere on Bandcamp. She goes by a number of different aliases, but again, Stevia Sphere on Bandcamp, check it out. Fantastic music. And there's really something to it. The game plays the music a lot, but I found that like I have the tolerance for it seems to be very high on loop, but there's something very catchy about it. I'm also glad that you called out the stick figure, man, because I think that was done in like a fugue state at like 2 a.m. one day of like, I want to have a dancing guy. The publisher started putting the new art in, kept looking at that dancing guy being like, I just think he needs to stay in there. We just need to like, update his head and hands and feet. And There was a lot of back and forth on just kind of having a more standard title screen, but I'm like, there's just something about that guy. I think there's something about that guy. And so, the people think that, yeah, there's something hypnotic about him. So I'm glad, trusted my instincts, and yeah, there's just something about that guy. I will say that he was connected to a larger meta thing that, isn't going in the game, at least not right away. I hope that we'll see that guy in other parts of the game someday, not just the title screen.
So listen up, the guy has secrets and stick around to find out what they are. You already told me what was the good part of developing your own game. What was the worst part about developing your own game?
You can't say yes to something without saying no to something else. We touched on this probably earlier about working a full-time job, having a family. It made it very hard to also make an indie game on the side. Luckily, I'm in a phase of life now where my son's teenager, it's not as active a relationship as it was when they're a little kid that wants to play all the time. Unfortunately, it's not like that anymore. And so, it might just be the way that I work personally, but Ballionaire is something I really had to throw myself into. A lot of hours. I know this is a controversial subject in game dev about crunch mode, but I kind of put myself in crunch mode, for half of the project, basically. I think it was necessary. The game is going to be a game that was in development for a year, which might seem like a long time for a, ball drops down automatically game. But I mean, for that year, I assure you, it was completely saturated, dense with work. And with 30 years of tech experience under my belt, this was not engineering problems slowing me down. It's just, that's how long it takes to design content basically in a coherent way. And so all that to say, I had to sacrifice my time effectively. This is something that I was fortunate enough that my family, explicitly bought into, of look, I'm going to be just working like crazy. I'm not going to go on vacation and da-da-da-da. Luckily, this is something that, my family was, they kind of signed on for. They know that this is a really important goal for me, but it did mean kind of less time with my family. There's sacrifices that had to be made. It's a very all-consuming practice, I would say, or at least how I operate in practice. It's all-consuming. So, I will need some recovery from this. It maybe doesn't have to be that way for other devs. I hope not, but for me, it was. So it's something that I had to pour myself into exclusively over the last year. So pretty much every other part of my life has been on hold. So that's the sacrifice. The worst part is the sacrifice, I suppose. I
can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sacrifice I opted for, I suppose, right? The goal was that important to me. So it's an exchange I understood, but it's still, that's the worst part.
It's also great to hear that you have this support network with your family as well. I learned over the years, make something look simple and work simple and just play as you intended. It's not such an easy bet. If it was, everybody would do it.
Agreed. I mean, I think we talk about this a lot, sort of elegance versus complexity. When I say we, I mean in kind of my peer game dev circles, elegance versus complexity. Yeah, I mean, I'd say in Ballionaire, part of it was the game begets the simplicity of play. You understand what's happening. I'm sorry, in terms of I drop a ball and it hits things, everyone gets that core loop.
That's how it works. Okay, huh?
Oh yeah, well, so probably I knew I should have had a longer tutorial, darn it. Yeah, but with the combinatorics of it, the depth of the simulation, the mechanical depth just creates so much to play around in. So I think and I hope that the game is elegant. I think it might be complicated, but I hope it's at least elegant. We can distinguish between those two things.
Got me hooked right away. Since you have so much experience under your belt as a developer, do you have any advice for aspiring indie devs?
Obviously, I took a weird path. My advice can't be, well, actually, my advice probably will be work a different job for 20 years and then do it as a hobby. Honestly, I mean, I will say that in my experience, doing anything as a job, at least for me personally, the level of intensity that I approach jobs at can tend to kind of ruin that thing. I will say that game dev is more fun as a hobby, maybe than as a job. Going back to that point that presumably when it's a hobby, you're calling the shots, you're making something, voluntarily and with your vision in it. Maybe you have some collaborators and then there's a discussion there, but it's not a producer telling you that X, Y, and Z needs to happen. There's a large degree of autonomy. I think you can have a lot of fun with that. I think trying to force a commercial success can be very difficult and dangerous. So I really encourage people to approach it as a hobby, I think fundamentally, and to have fun with it. We're all in games because we like fun. Some of us have fun developing. In fact, I would say I enjoy game development more than games itself, I suppose. And I know a lot of people that actually feel that, other devs that feel that way. I think that like making a game is the most fun game of all, honestly. So just, I would say, and this is probably just general life advice, is staying in alignment with your actual intrinsic motivations is really important to maintain the love of something. I mean, if anyone's ever seen Kiki's Delivery Service, like I saw that movie shortly after I started my journey back to indie, and I was crying my eyes out. Like, there's that line she says where like, flying used to be fun until I started doing it for a living. And I really felt that. So I would say, maintain intrinsic motivation. It's very generic, like life coach advice. If extrinsic things happen to you, such as like the game takes off and there's an opportunity to commercialize it, fine. But I would say, stay intrinsically motivated. In our space, the indie space, like don't try to copy AAA games. I think the very natural structure of things is innovation and experimentation with indies, and leave the refinement to gigantic studios. And, on a more contemporary note, I would say with AI and in general, like that kind of like risk averse development, I think that it's in time where weirder and weirder aesthetics and mechanics, I think we're going to start to gain popularity due to just the tendency of things to homogenize with just kind of like where money pushes it into requiring homogenization. So I would just call to everyone, make weirder, shorter games, and let's experiment more. I think there's still so many modes of fun left to be discovered, and like even what is the nature of fun exactly is still being pecked away at. So think of yourself as, a wild, punk rock inventor, and let's see where we can push things to.
newobject, that's beautiful advice. I love it. Do you generally work in a team, or would you see yourself more as a solo dev?
That's a tricky question, or at least my answer is tricky. I absolutely love being in a great working relationship with a creative person or other creative people. Way back in the day at Monolith, worked, closely with level designer. I worked on AI. And so obviously there was like a lot of coordination with level designers there. And that, they're artists, I'm an engineer, and I really saw myself as, I didn't see AI as something that was like a hermetically sealed object that is just supposed to be smart. Like I really saw myself as giving them like a prop, a tool, or a creative tool, another brush that they would, the same way they would draw the levels. Here's another tool you can use to be an artist. I'm not an artist, you are. And so I love enabling artists in that way. I love that collaboration. I absolutely love that symbiotic relationship between artists and an engineer, and the really fruitful cycle of like mutual motivation that you can get into, kind of like a flywheel almost. So the flip side of that though is I kind of love, because as I mentioned, the act of designing a game is the most fun game to me. I love to kind of get to at least explore that fully autonomously, I suppose, and maybe like not start from day one with like a democratic approach, just get to kind of fully play and explore in my head. But at the same time, those collaborative relationships are insanely beneficial. So for Ballionaire and for newobject LLC as it currently stands, I'm a solo developer. When I connected with Raw Fury as a publisher, I mentioned that like I would want to redo the art because I was using some like stock vector art at the time. And they said, well, we've got Fury Studios, which is like a related entity to Raw Fury, which works on Kingdom games and helps out in these kinds of situations. So we can put you in touch with our artists there. The artists that I got connected with miraculously through the publisher. So, they work for that sister studio to Raw Fury. They're not part of newobject, although definitely want them right up there in the credits, because the game is just as much to owe to the art, as to anything on the design or tech side. New Object is just me, and I think I'll really have to kind of take it on a case-by-case basis moving forward. I mean, I know that I would love to have kind of a permanent creative partner, someone who's more on the art end of things, so they got the tech side handled. But I would never want to force that unnaturally or compromise anything for that. So something's just going to have to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, or just see what the future holds. Hopefully with like a slightly higher profile, if the game does well, I can more seriously have some bona fides and try to approach someone that I want to collaborate with or something like that. But also for myself personally, at the state of inception of a game, I mean, I'm just such a mechanics-oriented player. Graphics are like not an issue for me as a player, especially as a person who played games when they were like, a 1 centimeter pixel on your TV. I'm used no fidelity whatsoever. It's not a priority to me at the onset when you're, playing in a space. In fact, I've been increasingly doing prototypes in text mode only, kind of like in my air quotes spare time. So I mean like several months ago, not now. I think when it's the right time, it will present itself in a natural state, and that'll be that. But for now, it's just me.
You have your skills, which is the development part, and when you get help for graphics and for sound and so on, if it comes together beautifully as it does in Ballionaire, it's for the better.
Yeah, and I should also mention, by the way, because the credits, I have a little snippet in there. It says there's no such thing as a solo dev, and I really want to call out too. I was really lucky when I mentioned earlier that I presented this game in a Discord. That's kind of like where Local Thunk, noticed it. And this is a Discord I'd recently joined back in October, the Ludoculture Discord, run by Fabian Fisher. And it's just chock full of just incredible game devs on there. But I want to make really clear, I mean, everyone's credited in the credits too, that like, I got a lot of, design help with this game in terms of being in a community of peers that are happy to give feedback. And this is, expert feedback as well. And I can't call everybody out right now, but I mean, I really believe that there are a lot of like co-designers on this game, all in the credits, and just want to shout out everyone. Thank you so much. I mean, it would be wildly inaccurate to say this is my game only at all. I mean, it's really, I'm suspicious of anyone who claims they have no assistant, or truly solo. It's physically impossible, I think, unless you live in a box. So.
You also mentioned that you found a publisher for the game already, Raw Fury, I think?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Are you getting any other support, or is it just a publisher for Ballionaire for now?
Yeah, it's the publisher. There's a standard publisher setup there in terms of the support for developing the game, as well as various services, localization, testing, all the marketing, obviously. So I think I have a pretty standard publisher arrangement, I would say. And other than the fact that I found with the artists, gained access to the artists through the publisher, which I think is less common, but not something that never happens. So other than that, I believe it's a fairly normal setup.
Can you elaborate a little bit how you found them? Did they find you? Did you approach them? Or what was your tactic to get noticed or to get signed?
The prototype got pretty good amount of traction very quickly. I mean, Dan Giesling played it for several hours. It didn't quite reach Northern Line, but it played, a bunch of streamers in that kind of group of folks played it. And I had a Discord open, and it was an open prototype on itch. People basically came to me. I did some reach outs as well, but definitely also had publishers coming to me. So I talked to a bunch of those and ultimately felt like Raw Fury was a great fit. Unfortunately, I don't have the war story of like took the game on the roadshow for months and months to refine the pitch deck. I mean, the pitch deck is a very austere Google slide with, just the default font basically, and some screenshots. So unfortunately, in terms of the advice here was get lucky and make something that's like immediately appealing and people can see the appeal. If you don't do that, then I unfortunately don't have any experience in how to like otherwise attract a publisher. So yeah. Sorry to not be helpful. That's the journey I went on.
I think you already did the heavy lifting by creating something that's so appealing that people knock on your door. That's also quite an achievement.
It's certainly a litmus test how to evaluate the game. I mean, if folks are approaching you, if people are, that's a sure sign that you're onto something. So,
based on your experience in the United States, is it a great place to develop games?
Given the state of the cost of healthcare in the United States, the cost of living in general, especially with real estate, there are a lot of financial factors that I think would make it very hard to be kind of a bootstrapping indie dev in the US right now. So from a practical financial point of view, obviously from kind of a community point of view, I guess there's a long history of indie game devs coming out of the US, and There's been a little bit of a cultural hegemony for a while, I would say, although it's obviously diminishing with globalization. So there's some advantages in that perspective, I think, to being in the US. Again, just not clear how much they continue to be relevant. So let's see. I think it could be, there's financial challenges, I would say, unless you manage to overcome them by finding funding for your game. But there's also like a very strong indie community here with a long history. So that's a good thing too. So I think there's pros and cons. Fortunately for me, I guess with my approach of like delay being an indie game dev for 20 years, the financial part was less burdensome and I could benefit from the community. Although having said that, like I'm not really a member of the local community. I guess I found my place more in an online, global kind of community, just as it happened to be. But, I'd love to maybe try to connect more with the local community here in Seattle next year. Just right now, I basically don't leave the house. I mean, that's my crunch mode state. Or to go to the meetups when you're just crunching. So yeah, I think there's pros and cons to being in the US for sure when it comes to indie game dev.
Yeah, but that also ties in nicely with the advice that you gave before. So first have a nest egg and then do what you love and create a game. New Object, that's our interview. Thank you so much for being on our show. I really can't wait to play the full game of Ballionaire. Check it out, and when the game releases, try it, play it, you will love it. I guarantee it.
Well, thank you so much. I had a blast talking with you. I had a blast talking about Ballionaire, and I really appreciate you reaching out to me. It's an honor to be on your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really great having you. Take care.
My pleasure. Take care.